Bishop Arnold would be saying, "You're hired. You are hired, man." I almost feel like I have to start out with an apology to the bishop. That was my name for Brother Arnold. I always called him the bishop, but he always told me, "Dwight," he said, "you're going to have something to do with my funeral, and when you do, you make sure it's short." He said, "I don't like long funerals." And I witnessed him many a time at a funeral. He'd get up and say, "Well, you've all taken so much time, I think I'm just going to cut this short." And he always told me, he said, "My funerals are a little like bologna. I can cut them off anywhere." Barry Arnold, what a great man. What a great man, great friend. Frankly, the rest of you did a horrible job at sticking to your time limit. And so I decided I'm not going to stick to mine either. I'm going to do exactly what I want to do. I just want to talk to you about a couple things, some lessons I learned from the life of Barry Arnold. The number one lesson that I learned from Barry Arnold was preach Jesus and love people. Barry Arnold was not concerned about a lot of things that did not matter. But he was greatly concerned that when we got in the pulpit, we told people about Jesus, because he was the only answer that every time given would make an eternal difference in somebody's life. And I remember we'd be talking about what are we going to preach and struggling with this or that. And he'd look at me as a young preacher and he'd say, "Dwight, just make much of Jesus. Make much of Jesus." And what a difference that's made in my life. And then secondly, last night and again today, a huge testament to the fact of a man who learned to love people. Didn't matter who you were. It didn't matter where you were from. It didn't matter if you looked good or bad. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor. It didn't matter where you came from. It didn't matter your status. It didn't matter what language you spoke. I've seen him many, many, many Sundays. In fact, almost every Sunday he would leave here and go to the Spanish church, and the Dutchman would try to be Spanish for a few minutes at least. Oh, he couldn't say much. Him and I, we went to Spanish class once, but we didn't make it very long, and we decided that probably wasn't for us. Preach Jesus, love people, Dwight. And he would tell me often, and I wish that I could tell all the young preacher boys this. You can be a poor preacher, but a good pastor and survive. But you can't be a good preacher and a poor pastor and make it. Now, he was both, but take that home and chew on it because you need to, and he'd want me to tell you that. The second lesson I learned from him was the value of hard work. I don't know if you know it or not, but Barry Arnold was one of the hardest working men I've ever met in my entire life. In the church work, we're talking about radio broadcast, minute spots on the radio, hospital visitation, jail ministry, food pantry ministry, Dallas Story, nursing home, bus ministry, funerals, sermons prepared and preached, notes of encouragement. How many of you here today ever got a note from Barry Arnold? A ton of people. And they weren't typed out, trust me. He had no clue what to do with a typewriter. He didn't want anything to do with a computer. But he often would get those little cards that he'd have made up, and he'd write those personal notes. If you visited preachers, you should take note. Do like Barry Arnold does. Or did. When you visited his church on Monday, a note was written and you got it in the mail in a couple days saying, "We sure were glad to have you at our church today." A busy man, a man who knew much about hard work. And if you think that you can do what Barry Arnold did without the work ethic that he had, I've got great news for you. It's not possible. I heard somebody recently ask him what did he think was what made the difference in his ministry? And he said, "Oh, it's real easy. WORK. Work. I would hear people ask him sometimes, what do you think made the difference? What one thing made you successful? And he'd go down the long list of things that he was trying to do, and at the end, he would just tell them, I have no idea, but if you do something, something will always happen. If you do nothing, nothing will happen. And it worked. He not only was a hard worker when it came to the church, but man, did we ever have fun farming. And, I drove by somebody yesterday baling hay, still the old way, with an old baler that didn't throw any bales. And I can just remember day after day, time after time, one of the highlights of my life, he'd usually let me know, I'm going to be baling hay this afternoon. And I knew what that meant. That meant if you're at all available, I need you to come help me bale hay. And he'd drive the tractor and I'd ride back on the wagon and we'd make hay together and just have a blast. And then every once in a while he knew I wasn't available, and so he would get the baler and he'd go and he'd bale all the hay and dump it out on the ground. And then he'd wait till I got home. And he'd drive the pickup truck and I'd throw all the bales up on the truck and we'd take them home. But we had fun working together. The corn picker. Oh, he grew corn out here. These kids, they were all so worried he shouldn't be out there with the corn picker. He's going to get caught in the corn picker and something bad's going to happen. So I thought, well, I'll help to ease their minds. And so I would go out, I'd climb back in the gravity wagon. Now, it was just a 1 or 2 row corn picker. We didn't pick a lot of corn real fast, but boy, did we have fun. And I'd ride in the gravity wagon. When the picker would break, I'd get out and fix the picker, and we'd go on and pick some more corn. I remember one night we were picking corn. We got done. It was dark. And he was discouraged about the deer that were eating his corn. And we decided that we were just going to take a couple out for crop damage. This is behind the church here. And so it's dark, and he says, why don't you go up and get your gun and let's see what we can do. I said, all right. We went up to my house. I was driving an old Ford Aerostar van, I think at the time. We got the gun, we got the van, we got the spotlight. We headed down into the field. We talked together about how this wouldn't be a problem, no big deal. And how sure we were that we were going to have meat before long. We drove out in the field. He shone the spotlight. I shot the gun. Deer went everywhere. Nothing went down. Only thing that happened was before long we heard a strange noise. It was the noise of a siren. It was the policeman coming. Someone had called in. Shots fired. Here the policeman comes. He puts his spotlight right on us. Follows us across the field. I said, Bishop, I can see the headlines now. But we had a lot of fun together. We worked hard. The man, my hat is off to him. Many times, over 2,000 calls a year he made to people. A lot of guys wonder why their church don't grow like his. I can tell you, check your call log. I remember him being at times so exhausted from a day of work here at the church. Preached in the chapel, preached the morning service, nursing home in the afternoon, evening service, and he'd be so exhausted, I literally would lead him out the back door, down the steps, out to his car, because his vertigo was so extreme from his weariness. I'd lead him to his car, open the door. I don't know why I didn't drive him home, but I'd put him inside and he'd drive himself to the farm. But a man with a strong work ethic. Last but not least, and I don't know when I started, but I hope I'm doing okay, Bishop. The third thing I really learned from Barry Arnold is the value of lasting relationships. I want you to listen to this, and I want you to think about this, and I want all of us to do better at applying this to our lives, because this was him. Barry Arnold lived out and believed that relationships were more important than his rights or opinions or doctrines or beliefs. He found a way to get along with most everyone. I say most because it wasn't always possible. Sometimes he told me, Dwight, never step on a sleeping dog's tail. Now, he was slow, as Brother Sherman has already suggested, and I was the bull in the china closet. And so he slowed me down, and I tried to speed him up. But he had developed relationships. I can illustrate it. I remember we were having a board meeting, and I had traveled several times to youth convention in a school bus. And Barry, Brother Arnold and I, Bishop and I, we had talked about this. And I said, Bishop, I think we ought to buy a bus, a coach bus. And Penview was selling their old 1965 coach bus, but boy, it was beautiful, beautiful bus. And I said, I think we ought to buy that. And he said, I think you ought to take that to the church board and see what happens. I said, all right, I'll do it. And so that next board meeting, it's on the agenda. All those astute board members, some of them are here today. Some of them have gone on to heaven. I bring up the idea that we ought to buy a coach bus. They shot me down so fast, you couldn't say boo. It was over, done. Ichabod, not happening. I think that was around October, November when that happened, and IHC was coming, and Brother Arnold wanted to go, and him and Sister Arnold were going to go, and he said, hey, why don't you see if you could arrange, we could maybe rent the school's coach bus, and I said, no problem. So I made the arrangements, we rented the bus. I don't remember who drove it, but somebody drove it. He comes home and he says, Dwight, he said, that bus is amazing. He said, smooth. He said, it rides good. It runs good. He said, I think we ought to buy that bus. I said, I think that if we're going to buy that bus, you're going to present it to the board and not me. Because when I did that, they laughed me out of town. And he walks into that board meeting. He says, I think we ought to buy that coach bus. And they all said, I agree 100%. Where can we do that? It was all about relationships that he had built in life. All of you are here today because relationships, all of us here last night, hundreds of people that filed through because Barry Arnold knew how to make everybody feel special, everybody feel like that they were important, everybody feel like that their opinions mattered. He found a way to get along with most everybody. I really don't know how to express how I feel about the loss of Bishop Arnold. Because he was the man that you could tell anything to. And he took a lot of stuff with him. And I just pray that God would help me to be like the bishop. He always told me, especially in these last years, he said, Dwight, I want to finish strong. I got to finish strong. And I always told him, you're finishing strong. Bishop, you're finishing strong. You got nothing more to prove. You got nothing more to do. And I know that there's nobody that heard the words any truer or any more from Jesus when he said, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Enter into the joys of heaven. I got to tell you one more funny story and then I'll stop. I could tell stories all day, all night. When I was there just a couple weeks ago, we were telling stories and he was laid back in his recliner chair laughing and he said, oh, Dwight, he said, just keep telling those stories. Keep telling those stories. But I remember this particular Sunday, two of them that come to mind real quickly. He was a little spontaneous, in case you didn't know that. He wasn't always all put together, as he appeared to be, but he wasn't always. And this particular Sunday morning, it was around July 4th. We're getting ready to walk out of the office. On the way out the door, he says, hey, by the way, Dwight, he said, would you mind singing that song, something about New York City stands a lady with her torch raised? And I said, well, Bishop, I don't have a clue what the words are to the song. I don't even, I haven't practiced the song. I said, just talk to Bradley over there. Bradley was at the piano. He said, I think you guys can make that happen. And so we went out. I talked to Bradley. He had the words in the piano bench. We got the words. I said, Bradley, I don't know this. I don't know what's going to happen with this. But I said, you can play it, and I'll try to sing it. Put it in some key you think I can manage, and we'll make it happen. And sure enough, we got up and sung as though we'd been planning on that for weeks and weeks and months. We'd never let anybody know if we didn't really know what we were doing. But I remember one Sunday, it didn't go quite as well as that Sunday. And Matt Crocker is here probably somewhere. Yeah, there's Matt. Matt Crocker's a harmonica player. And somehow Matt had convinced me that I ought to play a special with him on the harmonicas. Now, there's one problem between us doing that, and that was that Matt can play a harmonica, and I really can't. I have a harmonica that I bought at Cracker Barrel, and that's what I play. I mean, that's all I got. So we got up on that Sunday night, and we're going to play. The bishop's sitting behind me, and as we began to play Send the Light, I believe, the crowd just kept getting bigger and bigger, the laughter. And I was trying to figure out what in the green earth am I doing wrong in this harmonica special. I'd practiced this. We got all done, and I turned around and looked, and there he was, just bent over double, hollering, laughing. And I knew then why everybody else. Barry Arnold, what a man. What a pastor. What a friend. What a leader. Bishop, I just want you to know, you finished strong. And I'm going to do my best to finish strong as well. Thank you, family, for allowing me the privilege to share today.